Good morning, everybody.
Hi there.
It's good to see you guys. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about this week about, we want to go off some of what Rick was preaching about. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that message, I'd say jump back on, take a look. We've been going through a series in Psalms and talking this week about what it looks like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and what it looks like to walk through dark times. And there's a lot right now that just feels really heavy, whether most of it's with all the stuff going on in our country right now, things just feel heavy. And so what we wanted to talk about is what it looks like to walk through those things together, because in our marriage it's real easy to start getting separated and start getting, especially when one or the other of us start to get down, it's real easy to start to distance ourselves, especially if we're both feeling down. And so we want to talk about the fact that when we're in the midst of those times, that's when it becomes utterly critical to look at one another and say, what is it that my spouse needs? What is it that I need to do to help provide for our marriage, to build us up, to continue to help us grow? And the things that go on in our world around us are going to have different impacts on us. And so obviously we'll hit times where one or the other of us is up and the other one's down. We'll hit times when we're both up, and we'll hit times when we're both down. And in each of those times, it's really important that we continue to evaluate what are the things that we need to be doing for one another. What are the things that our marriage needs? We've talked about that a lot through the series. What is it that our marriage needs in order to thrive and flourish? And so as we're in these times and we start dealing with things that are, whether it's directly hitting us or the things in our world that are around us that are weighing heavy on us, what does it look like to lean into one another and to really bolster one another and bolster the relationship? So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the fact that sometimes it's really hard to feel like you can bolster your spouse when you've got nothing left, when you're like, I'm exhausted, I'm sad, I'm frustrated with whatever the scenario is. But to say, okay, that may be true, but that may also be true for them. So what does it look like to look at your spouse and say, what is it that they need? And honestly, I've spent years saying, well, what do you need? And what I've found for the most part is people don't know how to answer that question for themselves. But recognize that you probably know your spouse as well as they do and can figure out the things that they need. And so in those times where it's difficult and they're struggling, to go, okay, I know what they need. And to be willing to step in and do those things, to be willing to step in and say, okay, I'm going to give this because I know that's what they need in these moments. And not to wait for them to ask, and not even to ask them, what is it that you need? And obviously there are going to be times where you're like, I'm at a loss. I really don't know how to help. And sometimes those times it's just a matter of putting your arms around one another and just sitting in whatever the scenario is together. Thoughts at this point?
Well, we had talked about how circumstances are temporary, and that even goes back to what Rick was talking about in the service today, that there are seasons in our life, and God works on seasons. And Mike and I have found that true to be in our marriage as well. That there are seasons where the circumstances in our life are good and they feel easy, and then there are other times where the circumstances in our lives feel hard. And to be mindful that those things are temporary, and how can we bolster and encourage one another through that? How can we just enjoy the really good times and to celebrate that, and to remember to rest in the ease of that season of marriage or that season of life, and to just really acknowledge it, that you're having a sweet season, and to celebrate that together. But our feelings can be really strong in the midst of especially a hard time, and those feelings can feel like so overpowering, and it's like our reality is based in those feelings. And that's something that I think has been important for Mike and I. Especially Mike reminds me a lot of my feelings, and that they're feelings and they're valid and they're real, and they're to be acknowledged, but not to be grounded in our feelings, but to be grounded in the truth of Christ, and to not sit in those feelings, but to acknowledge them and then to continue to move forward. And I have found strength in our marriage to continue taking steps forward in those really dark, hard times. And knowing that we're doing it together has been a huge source of strength. And there's this common thing amongst marriage talk and the differences between men and women, that men often want to fix women's problems. And I don't find that to be true with Mike. He doesn't, that's not where he goes to when I'm struggling.
I gave up.
Well, and he said it, there are plenty of times where we can't fix our spouse's blue mood. We can't fix a lot of problems in each other's lives. Like, that's not within our control to do that. But leaning into each other, not being afraid of like being sucked into their dark space, but to acknowledge, like, I am up right now and he's down, and I have the ability to do more. I can carry more responsibilities in the home with our kids. I can be a source of just strength and encouragement, and I don't need for him to change in order to make me feel better, or to not be afraid of being sucked into his struggle. And I have found with Mike that in my struggles, that he just listens. He just listens, endlessly listens. And to all the feelings and all the thoughts and all of the going around and around in my head, and doesn't try to fix it. He'll give input at the end, but he sits and listens, and he's quiet, and he gives me space to just pause and to think and to share more things. And that might not feel like he's doing a whole lot. It wouldn't feel like I'm doing a whole lot if I were doing that on his behalf. But it has been so meaningful to me. It has reflected love back to me. It has given me space to be me. And then in the end of all of it, he will give me some thoughts, and he'll give me some reflections of what I've said. He'll try to unweave and untangle things. He'll challenge me some. He'll just love me in it, and he'll love me for who I am in all of the mess. And so I just encourage you to step into the dark times with your spouse. And if you can't fix it, whether it's something culturally going on right now that you can't fix like that in the blink of an eye, or it's something personal, a struggle going on in one of each of you, just lean in and just be there. Just be there and find meaningful ways to reflect to your spouse that I love you, whether that's picking up, doing some extra chores, or picking up dinner for that night, or sitting and listening. I mean, there's just so many things. And like Mike said, you know your spouse as well as they do. And you know what would be meaningful to them. So be willing to step in and encourage one another. And don't be afraid not to be able to solve the problems, but just be in it. So.
And just remember, wherever you're at, like Jacqui said, it's temporary. Everything's going to change. So if you're in the best time of your life, enjoy it, embrace it. It's going to change. If you're in the darkest time of your life, learn from it, but it's going to change too. Mm-hmm. So where you're at isn't where you're going to be in a month, in a week. Everything's going to keep changing and moving. So just embrace where you're at and recognize that where I am is temporary. And sometimes we want it to move faster, sometimes we want it to stop, but that's not the way it works. We just keep going and keep figuring out what the next step is. And it's so much easier to do that when we're standing together. So that's our hope for you. Again, as always, if you need anything, feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to sit and talk with you. couplessupport@westwoodcc.org. If you want to email us, feel free to throw a comment in. But if you need anything, reach out. And if it's not to us, reach out to friends that you trust, that you know will help push through the difficult times with you. And if you're in great times, look for the people that need your hand, because they're those as well. And so reach out and help pull them along. So we hope you have a great week and hope things go well for you. And we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.